Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. This is your host, Lord Gord. I'm giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect. And we begin to rock. Steady, steady rocking all night long. And we begin to rock. Steady, rocking to the break of dawn. Boom, 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 boom. Rock. Steady. All right. This week, I'm going to talk about my man, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, Gulag Archipelago. I read the abridged version. Got it from Barnes & Noble a few months back. I've been meaning to do this podcast for a little while, but I had some other topics I wanted to cover before Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago and some of my favorite passages from Gulag Archipelago. I'm going to introduce you guys to a little blurb of Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. He was born 1918, died 2008. He served as a decorated captain in the Soviet Army during World War II, but in 1945 he was sentenced to prison for 8 years for criticizing Stalin and the Soviet government in private letters. He went to jail for 8 years for criticizing the government in private letters. Yeah. That Soviet Union was as a haven for free market capitalism and individual rights. So it's completely insane that this happened to Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. All right. So let's get to one of my favorite passages from the book. I'm going to read that here. Latsis in the newspaper Red Terror, November 1st, 1918 said, quote, "We are not fighting against single individuals. We are exterminating the bourgeoisie as a class. It is not necessary during the interrogation to look for evidence proving that the accused opposed the Soviets by word or action. The question which you should ask him is what class does he belong to, what is his origin, his education, and his profession. These are the questions which will determine the fate of the accused. Such is the sense and the essence of the Red Terror." So in other words, it doesn't matter who you are as an individual or what you have done. All that matters is your class, your gender, your race, so on and so forth. If you listen to my podcast on the insidiousness of social justice, I talk about how all this nonsense about white privilege and critical race theory is based on communist Soviet ideology, that they're not fighting against individuals. They're not saying, hey, because you as an individual did this, you're going to be punished. They're saying, we don't like the idea of you. We want to remake the world as we see fit, and we are going to get rid of you because we do not like the idea of what you are. And that has been the case in all these little communist revolutions. In Maoist China, you got rid of the capitalist roaders. And Fidel Castro's Cuba, you got rid of the capitalists, the imperialists, so on and so forth. So it's always looking at what group people belong to versus looking at what they did as individuals. It is collectivism, one-on-one, and it's toxic. Let's even look at what Brett Kavanaugh is going through right now. There is no evidence to show that he even knew Christine Ford. She doesn't know when it happened, where it happened, who took her there, who took her home. All of her witnesses that she cited said that it never happened. But Judge Kavanaugh is being attacked and his reputation is being destroyed, not because of what he did as an individual. It's because of what he represents. He represents a conservative white man in America. He represents someone who's going to adhere to the United States Constitution, who isn't going to view it as a living document, which means you can make it mean whatever you mean, and you can wield the government as a scimitar and inflict your will on the people. That's why he's being attacked. And I've cited so many examples of this kind of thing, like the Chinese, like the Asian kids in New York City, how they're a small minority, yet they're 60% of the students in elite high schools, and how the Democrats are trying to implement racist policies which will discriminate against the Asians and would allow more blacks and Hispanics that don't deserve to be in those schools. And they are literally doing it on the fact, not that the Asians did something wrong individually, but as a group, they're doing something that the elite don't like. So this whole ideology of oppressor-oppressed and pitting groups against one another is very old. I mean, you see it in feminism, You see it in the black radical politics. I mean, you've seen this play out time and time again. Check out that podcast on the insidiousness of social justice. Let me read another quote. This is another quote on a different page. In the Dizhda camps of 1944, interrogator Mironenko said to the condemned Babich with pride in his faultless logic, "Interrogation and trial are merely judicial corroboration. They cannot alter your fate, which was previously decided. If it is necessary to shoot you, then you will be shot even if you are altogether innocent. If it is necessary to acquit you, then no matter how guilty you are, you will be cleared and acquitted." I mean, you see how chilling that is when the government gets monopoly power, when some concentrated elite are able to dictate the whims of the world as they see fit. In other words, he said, listen, man, in the Soviet Union, it doesn't matter what you do. The government owns you. We can do whatever we want with you. We do not protect your rights. That's what that is, though. I mean, it's just like a charge of racism. You get a charge of racism, for example. It's you can't prove a negative. Say someone says, "Hey, Lord Gord, you're a big racist." How do I prove that I'm not a racist? You cannot prove that you're not a racist. All you can say to someone is, "You have to prove that I am a racist." This is why you need due process. This is the opposite of due process. This is the government telling you, listen, it doesn't matter how guilty you are or how innocent you are. We control your life. We control your destiny. That's what it's been time and time again in these socialist, communist regimes. There's no exception. Yet this is what people want to bring to America. This is the ideology that they brought to America with things like disparate impact, critical race theory, restorative justice, criminal justice reform. All these things are predicated on the fact that some concentrated elite doesn't like the statistical disparities and saying that those statistical disparities are due to racism or whatever. So by convincing people that they're due to racism or some sinister force, the people give up their freedom and autonomy to the government, and the government is able to control the whims and lives of people based on arbitrary things like skin color and gender. Let me read some more on this page. What prompted them all to slip into harness and pursue so zealously not truth but totals of the process and condemned, because it was most comfortable for them not to be different from the others, and because these totals meant an easy life, supplementary pay, awards and decorations, promotions in rank, and the expansion and prosperity of the organs themselves. If they ran up high totals, they could loaf when they felt like it, or do poor work or go out and enjoy themselves at night, and that is just what they did. Low totals led to their being kicked out, to a loss of their feed bag, for Stalin could never be convinced that in any district or city or military unit he might suddenly cease to have enemies. So what we see here is Stalin said, listen, man, people hate me and people will always hate me, so it's your job to arrest people for whatever reason that you want to. And if you don't do that, you will be fired. So literally your job is to create criminals, to create slaves for the Gulag. To create slaves that are going to work in these Soviet camps. In the height of the Gulag, 52,000 prisoners died a month. This stuff really, really affects me emotionally, because it really is truly a loss of justice. This is social justice. This is what happens when you give government officials all the power to make over the world when they see fit. This is what happens when you slowly but surely give away your freedoms in the name of social justice or equality. Yes, you are all equal. You are all equally tyrannized under the government. You are all equally poor. You are all equally unable to be the arbiter of your destiny. This is what happens. This is truly horrifying. So when they talk about slavery, they never talk about slavery in the 20th century. You know, I'm going to read some of these numbers later. Let me just read it now. 66 million people were in Soviet slave camps from the October Revolution through 1959 in the Gulag, the archipelago. 66 million slaves, but no one talks about these people. One, because they're white, and two, because the left is sympathetic to communism and socialism. You know, most journalists are leftists, and in my podcast about how the left is fake news, I talked about how Walter Duranty received a Pulitzer Prize for lying about the forced famines in the Soviet Union, the mass extermination of the kulaks, which were a peasant class that grew crops for the people. And they were opposed not because they broke some law. They were opposed because the elite hated what they were. That's the idea of them. Just some competent people that lives on their own outside the government, that provides goods and services at prices people are willing to pay for. That's sincere sense of social justice. Let me read another quote here, page 71. If we were able to discover the hidden motivations behind individual arrest, we would be astounded to find that, granted the rules governing arrest in general, 75% of the time the particular choice of whom to arrest, the personal cast of the die was determined by the human greed and vengefulness, and of that 75%, half were the result of material self-interest on the part of the local NKVD, and of course their prosecutor too, for on this point I do not distinguish between them. So like I said earlier, listen, the more people you arrest, the more bonuses you get, the easier your life is as an employee of the government. So it didn't matter if the people were innocent or not. Off to the slave camp with you. I'm living a good life. So who cares about you? Who cares about due process? Who cares about your rights and your dignity as an individual? It's collectivism. It's all about groups. Kulaks, enemies. Capitalists, enemies. Men, enemies. Whites, enemies. Jews, enemies. Doesn't matter what your merit is as a person, what you committed. As long as the idea of you is opposed by the elite, you will be punished. All right, let's go to page 151 of this thing. All right. I'm talking about the transports for the slaves. When they're captured, they were sent packed like sardines into these trains. Here we go. The Stolypin car is an extraordinary passenger car divided into compartments, except that 5 of the 9 compartments are allotted to the prisoners. Here, as everywhere in the archipelago, half of everything goes to the auxiliary personnel, the guards, and compartments are separated from the corridor not by a solid barrier, but by a grating which leaves them open for inspection. According to the calculations of non-prisoner engineers, 6 people can sit on the bottom bunks of a Stolypin compartment, and another 3 can lie on the middle ones, which are joined in one continuous bunk, except for the space cut out beside the door for climbing up and getting down, and 2 more can lie on the baggage shelves above. Now, if, in addition to these 11 more are pushed into the compartment, the last of whom are shoved out of the way of the door by the jailer's boot as they shut it, then this will constitute a normal completion for a Stolypin prisoner's compartment. You're literally packed like a sardine. You can barely move in this thing. And you're being shipped to a prison camp, which you will probably never get out of. The only freedom is death. Yet the story of these people are never talked about. My man Owen Benjamin talks about this. This is the Holocaust is talked about. The Holocaust is horrifying. More people died under Stalin in the Holocaust. And like I said, no one talks about the Gulag or the Soviet slave camps because they are sympathetic to leftism, communism, totalitarianism, social justice, which is what the Gulag and the Soviet Union was built upon. I mean, there are plenty of apologists then and now for the Soviet Union. And they were all on the left. Listen to my podcast, The Left is Fake News. Yuri Bezmenov talks about it, how these idiots from LA Times, New York Times, would be shown lies about Russia by the Soviets, and they would go along with it, 1, because if you didn't get along with them, you lost your job, and 2, because they were soft on communism. All right, let's go to page 163 here. Okay. Oh, man. There's a reason why I picked this out in the book. It's a guy named Eric. I believe he was from Sweden, I believe, and I wrote in my book The Quintessential White Liberal. So his name was Eric Arvid Anderson, and I'm gonna read you what happened to Eric. Eric, on his return to the West, wrote articles in the press defending and praising Soviet communism, Soviet socialism, and this proved to be his undoing. In those very years, in 1947 and 1948, they were roping in from all sorts of nooks and crannies progressive young Westerners prepared to renounce the West publicly. And it appeared that if they could have only collected another dozen or so, the West would shudder and collapse. So, Eric's newspaper articles caused him to be regarded as suitable for this category. And at that time, he was serving in West Berlin, and he had left his wife in Sweden. And out of pardonable male weakness, he used to visit an unmarried German girl in East Berlin. I'm jumping in my car and going too damn fast for me. Oh, will I make it? Oh, will she fake it? Oh, when we do it tonight. It's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming for you. Just like Adam and Eve. The woman was his weakness. So I'm going to abridge this. They took him to Moscow, the Soviets. Rogromko, who had once dined at his father's home in Stockholm and who knew the son also, not only returned the hospitality, but proposed to the young man that he renounce publicly both capitalism and his father. They locked him up in a dacha outside Moscow, fed him like a prince in a fairy tale, surrounded him with the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and waited a year for him to be re-educated. To their surprise, it did not happen. Those 2 years had very strongly confirmed him in his loyalty to the West. He believed blindly in the West. He did not want to recognize his weaknesses. He considered Western armies unbeatable and Western political leaders faultless. He refused to believe us when we told him that during the period of his imprisonment, Stalin had begun a blockade of Berlin and had gotten away with it perfectly well. Eric's milky neck and creamy cheeks blushed with indignation whenever we ridiculed Churchill and Roosevelt. And he was also certain that the West would not countenance his, Eric's, imprisonment, that on the basis of information from Kuybyshev, Transnistria, and the Western intelligence services would immediately learn that Eric had not drowned in the Spree River, but had been imprisoned in the Soviet Union. And either he would be ransomed or someone would be exchanged for him. This faith in the individual importance of his own fate, among other prisoners' fates, was reminiscent of our own well-intentioned Orthodox Soviet communists. Notwithstanding our heated arguments, he invited my friend and me to Stockholm whenever we would come. Everyone knows us there, he said with a tired smile. My father virtually maintains the Swedish king's whole court. For the time being, however, the son of a billionaire had nothing to dry himself with, and I presented him with an extra towel as a gift. And soon they took him away on a prisoner transport. So what happened to Eric Anderson is sad, but it's typical. I mean, I see white liberals of all stripes on the United States of America. I work in Santa Monica sometimes. And I was passing this house, and the sign basically said, we stand against Trump. We're for multiculturalism. We stand with illegal immigrants. Black Lives Matter, so on and so forth. So that's hilarious. Those people are able to advocate for these disastrous policies from far away, and they get social brownie points. But they will never, ever live in its midst. They will never live in MacArthur Park or East LA or Huntington Park, where you have tons of illegals and crime and welfare dependency, so on and so forth. They will never live in those black ghettos, which are the most dangerous places in the United States of America. They will never go live in the projects for a week. Like the reality TV show that I propose, all the apologists for black criminality can go live in a housing projects or a black neighborhood for a week, and they have to take public transportation, and they can't call the police. And we'll see how long they last. So Eric is just a typical virtue signaling white liberal. You know, when he was able to do that from afar, you know, it was all good. But when the Soviets actually called him on his nonsense, oh no, the West is great. I can't renounce the West. I don't like Stalin and Marx and Engels. Those people are evil. I love the West. Yeah, where were you when you were writing in your newspaper just how sympathetic you were to Soviet communism, Soviet totalitarianism, Soviet centralized control, you fool? You know, all these people talking about Me Too, criticizing Kavanaugh. Imagine if that happened to your son, or that happened to your husband, or happened to your uncle. Would you be saying, hey, believe women? Because some woman said that you did something without a speck of evidence, we should destroy this man's life and reputation? No, you'd be saying, hey, let's see the facts. Just like all these Me Too people, Rose McGowan, saying, hey, whenever a woman says something about a man, she must be believed. He must lose his livelihood. He must be thrown in jail. Oh, but when it happens to your friend, Asia Argento, oh, let's wait for the facts. Leftists are hypocrites. Eric Anderson is a microcosm of this fact. It's very easy to talk about, oh, public schools are so great. We need to support our public schools. Yet you white leftists never send your kids to public school. You send them to private school because the public schools are garbage. All right. It's one for hypocrisy. Page 193. As long as there were unemployment in the nation, there was no feverish demand for prisoner manpower, and arrest took place not as a means of mobilizing labor, but as a means of sweeping clean the road. But when the concept arose of stirring up the whole 180 million with an enormous mixing paddle, when the plan for super-industrialization was rejected in favor of the plan for super-industrialization, when the liquidation of the kulaks was already foreseen, along with the mass public works of the first 5-year plan, on the eve of the year of the great fracture, the view of the archipelago and everything in the archipelago changed too. It was decreed that harsh measures of repression should be applied to class enemies and hostile class elements, that the camp regimen should be made more severe, and that socially unstable elements should not be given terms at all. And in addition, forced labor should be set up in such a way that the prisoner should not earn anything from his work, but that the state should derive economic profit from it, and to consider it necessary from now on to expand the capacity of labor colonies. It was just what I was saying earlier. This is arrest more people so we can enrich the state at the expense of everyone. If you ever notice when it comes to socialism, communism, leftism, progressivism, the leaders are never the workers, that's one, and the leaders are never poor. Everyone else is poor. Fidel Castro's eating huge turkeys and steaks. Mao eating huge turkeys and steaks. Stalin eating huge turkeys and steaks. Everyone has to sacrifice their life and their freedom to the state except the rulers. Because that's what socialism is. It is state-sponsored slavery. Everyone is a slave to these elites. And that's basically what was said here. Anyone who's deemed to be a class enemy, which can literally be anyone at any time, at any place, you're thrown in the machine. Like I said, the height of the Gulag, 52,000 died a month. At an instant, you can become a slave. That's what happens when you don't have due process. That's what happens when you don't have private property rights. That's what happens when you take away guns from the populace. That's what happens when you give these leftists power in the name of social justice and equality. This is what happens. If you don't believe in those, happen time and time again throughout history. Don't believe Lord Gord, but when it happens, don't come to Lord Gord. And they say, hey man, Lord Gord, I can't get into the school because of my skin color. Hey Lord Gord, I can't go this place because of my skin color. Hey Lord Gord, I can't say this because of my skin color. Lord Gord, I can't do this because of the money I make. Lord Gord, I can't do this because of my gender. Don't come back to me. I warned you. I warned you. Marx, concerning himself with a less remote time, declared with equal conviction that the one and only means of correcting offenders was not solitary contemplation, but not moral soul-searching, not repentance, and not languishing, but productive labor. He himself had never in his life taken a pick in his hand. To the end of his days, he never pushed a wheelbarrow, mined coal, felled timber, and we don't even know how his firewood was split, but he wrote that down on paper, and the paper did not resist. Just like Bernie Sanders. He's never produced any wealth in his life. He's never worked a day in his life. These people writing up all these economic systems on how millions of people are supposed to live. how you're supposed to be the new emperor and ruler of everyone. How everyone should adhere to your ideology. Never worked a day in your life. You speak so boldly in the name of the workers. Lenin spoke so boldly in the name of the workers. Never had ever stepped foot in a working class neighborhood when he was imposing all this socialist crap from Moscow. All right, let me continue with this. And for his followers, everything now fell into place. To compel a prisoner to labor every day, sometimes 14 hours at a time, at the Kolyma mine faces, was humane and would lead to his correction. On the contrary, to limit his confinement to a prison cell, courtyard, and vegetable garden, and give him the chance to read books, write, think, and argue during these years, meant to treat him like cattle. So treating him like cattle would mean that he just sits in the room and reads and reflects on his misdeeds. But literally making him into a slave is liberating him. I mean, but this is a person whose ideology led to the death of over 100 million people in peacetime, so we should really take this guy's word, huh? And fake news leftist New York Times celebrated the 200th birthday of this man, Karl Marx. That lets you know what you need to know about the New York Times. Useful Idiot from the United States says, oh, What an intelligent, far-sighted, humane administration from top to bottom, close quote, as Supreme Court Judge Leibowitz of New York State wrote in Life magazine after having visited Gulag. Quote, in serving out his term of punishment, the prisoner retains a feeling of dignity, close quote. To call him an idiot would be an understatement. To call him a useful idiot would be an understatement. This man was an apologist for slavery, for totalitarianism. But I'm sure he's a Republican, though. Absolutely positive. I'm sure he always voted right wing. I'm absolutely positive. A joke. All right. Here it is. Not just individual features, but the whole meaning of their existence was identical for serfdom and the archipelago. They were forms of social organization for the forced and pitiless exploration of the unpaid labor of millions of slaves. We agree that there are more differences between Zeks and serfs, but what is surprising is that all the differences are to the credit of serfdom. All the differences are to the discredit of the Gulag Archipelago. The serfs did not work longer than from sunrise to sunset. The Zeks started work in darkness and ended in darkness. For the serfs, Sundays were sacred, and the 12 sacred Orthodox holidays as well, and local saints' days, and a certain number of the 12 days of Christmas. The prisoner was fearful on the eve of every Sunday. He didn't know whether they would get it off, and he never got holidays at all. Those 1st of May and those 7th of November involved more miseries, with searches and special regimen, than those holidays were worth. For the serfs, Christmas and Easter were genuine holidays, and as for a body search either after work or in the morning or at night, the serfs knew not of these. The serfs lived in permanent huts, regarded them as their own, and when at night they lay down on top of their stoves, or on their sleeping platform between ceiling and stove, or else on a bench, they knew, this is my own place. I have slept here forever and ever, and I always will. The prisoner did not know what barracks he would be in on the morrow, and even when he returned from work, he could not be certain that he would sleep in the same place that night. He did not have his own sleeping shelf or his own multiple bunk. He went wherever they drove him. Old Russia, which experienced Asiatic slavery for 7 whole centuries, did not know for the most part famine. The serfs were slaves, but they had full bellies. The Zeks would scuffle over a herring tail from the garbage pail. From Christmas and Easter, even the thinnest serf peasant broke his fast with fat bacon. But even the best worker in camp could get fat bacon only in parcels from home. The serfs lived in families. The sale or exchange of a serf away from his family was a universally recognized and proclaimed barbarism. The Zek was separated from his family on the first day of his arrest, in 50% of all cases, forever. If a son was arrested with his father, or a wife together with his husband, the greatest care was taken to see that they did not meet at the same camp. And if by some chance did they meet, they were separated as quickly as possible. Similarly, every time a man and woman Zek came together in a camp for fleeting or real love, they hastened to penalize them with the punishment cell, to separate them and send them away from another. I mean, that's powerful, man. That's emotional. Even serfs, people essentially who were slaves. Basically, serfs were they were very similar to like the slaves in America. I mean, you were owned, but serfs could eventually work for their freedom. I mean, they lived on the property. They were forced to live on the property. They did not know famine. They were allowed to be with their family. And even they got holidays off. So essentially, serfdom compared to Gulag, Soviet slave camps, was like Shangri-La. So, you know, like I said before, when I hear about slavery in the United States, Yuri Bezmenov said, you know, they never talked about slavery in my country. Slavery in the United States was bad. It was nowhere near as horrific. Up to sundown, you barely got to eat. No holidays off, no days off. Never fell in love with someone in a camp, you were taken away. This is stuff that happened in China, Soviet Russia, Cuba, Cambodia, Nazi Germany. I mean, anywhere where leftism is implemented, when leftism to its peak form is implemented, this is what you get: slavery, totalitarianism, lack of individual rights, top-down centralized control. These people are owned, and there's nothing that they can do about it. The only freedom was through death. Death. Yet no one talks about these people. No one talks about how this social justice ideology, this oppressor-oppressed ideology, this collectivist ideology leads to stuff like this. You know, kids in college campuses fly hammers and sickles, the sign of the Soviet slave camps, where 20, 30 million people died. 52 million people died a month in the height of these slave camps. And they fly those things. And no one says a word about it. But if you fly a swastika symbol, people rightfully chastise you and criticize you. You're rightfully ostracized from the society. But you fly the hammer and sickle, this evil, sinister, inhumane ideology. And it's just crickets. It's truly horrifying. It really tears my heart into pieces when I see stuff like that. And I mean, I read this, you know, this is the first time I really read this out loud. I mostly read silently, but when I read it out loud, my eyes, tears are forming in my eyes, because this is horrifying, man. And they don't teach you about this stuff in school. They never tell you about this in school. You know, the Soviet Union were allies in the United States against the National Socialists of Italy and Germany. And another thing in this book is that after World War II, the Brits and patriots of the United States worked with the Soviet Union to find defectors of the Soviet Union, people who fought in the war for the Allies, to find them in these countries and send them back. Stalin's own daughter, Svetlana, defected from the Soviet Union in India. If this place was so great, why would you defect from there? If it was a worker's paradise, a paradise of equality, why would you defect from there? I've never heard of Chelsea Clinton or the Obama kids or the Bush kids or any other sons or daughters of former U.S. presidents defected from the United States. I never heard of that. So, here's another fact for you. From the fall of 1938 to February 1939, at one of the UST VM camps, 385 out of 550 prisoners died. I'm telling you, Soviet communism, Soviet socialism was worse than Hitler's Nazi Germany. It was worse. More deaths. More deaths, man. Let me go to page 232. All right. This is about women in the Soviet slave camps. Let's just read what they did to women. You know, these people who are all for feminism and women's liberation and women's rights. No, they want to enslave women by making them tax slaves and by separating them from their children and making them opponents of men so they can be dependent on government. Find me a single old woman that's alone, that's not dependent on government. Okay? The vast majority of welfare recipients are single mothers that had babies out of wedlock. Okay? This has been the left's plan since day one. So let's talk about how they treat the women in the slave camps. In certain camps, a polite procedure was preserved. The women were conducted to their barracks, and then the well-fed, self-competent, and impudent trustees entered the barracks dressed in new padded jackets. Any clothing in camp which was not in tatters and soiled seemed mad foppery. Slowly and deliberately they strolled between the bunks and made their choices. They sat down and chatted. They invited their choices to visit them, and they were living too. Not in a common barrack situation, but in cabins occupied by several men. And there they had hot plates and frying pans, and they had fried potatoes too. An unbelievable dream. The first time, the chosen women were simply feasted and given the chance to make comparisons and to discover the whole spectrum of camp life. Impatient trustees demanded payment right after the potatoes, while those more restrained escorted their dates home and explained their future. You'd better make your arrangements inside the camp compound, darling, while it is being proposed in a gentlemanly way. There's cleanliness here, and laundry facilities, and decent clothes, and unfatiguing work. It's all yours. And it is true that there are women who, by their own very nature, out in freedom too, by and large, get together with men easily, without being choosy. Such women, of course, always had open to them the easy ways out. Others would bridle, hesitate, be embarrassed, and they were held back by shame before their girlfriends too. And when they had finally decided, when they had finally reconciled themselves, it might be too late. They might not find a camp taker. The guards and whatnot basically had their pick of the litter, they would say. Kind of like that scene in Rush Hour 2 when Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan go to the Chinese massage parlor and they're picking out the gorgeous women. Those gorgeous women are there by choice, and they're being paid for their services. But in the Soviet slave camps, the women are arrested and sent to the slave camp for any reason whatsoever. And they don't have a choice in the matter, okay? It's either, hey, when I pick you, it's either I feed you and then I rape you, or I explain to you that, hey, this is your new life now. It's better. It's a little bit better than being as a regular slave. And because I give you these things, you will now be my sexual slave. And if you oppose that, I will still rape you anyway. Or if you say no and then you change your mind, there might be a whole new group of girls brought in, and you will be yesterday's news. So in other words, as a woman, it's unfortunate, but it's true. If you're sent to the Soviet slave camp and someone picked you, the question's always compared to what? You want to just be a regular slave where you work from sun up to sundown, midnight to midnight? Or do you want to be fed fresh potatoes and have a nice place to do your laundry, but then you're a sex slave? That's leftism, folks. That's top-down centralized control. That's when you're dominated by the ideology of social justice. That's what happens. So women, this is your warning. When you put your trust and faith in the government, when the government takes care of you, the government owns you. Last passage before I have to get out of here, because I can do this all the time. We're talking about Article 58. So Article 58 in the Soviet Union was basically, hey, if you committed an act of terrorism, Article 58, boom, 10 years. Let's read this. Article 58, terrorism, 10 years. A shepherd in a fit of anger swore at a cow for not obeying. You collective farm whore. You got a 58 and a term. A deaf and dumb carpenter got a term for counter-revolutionary agitation. How? He was laying floors in a club. While he was working, he hung his jacket and his service cap on a bust of Lenin. Someone came in and saw it. 58, 10 years. The children in a collective farm club got out of hand, had a fight, and accidentally knocked some poster or other off the wall with their backs. The two eldest were sentenced under Article 58. And in a state farm bookkeeping office, the slogan hung, life has become better, life has become more gay. Stalin. And someone added in a letter in red pencil to Stalin's name, making the slogan read as though life had become more gay for Stalin. They didn't look for the guilty party. They sentenced the entire bookkeeping office. Irina Chuchinskaya was arrested while leaving church. She was charged with having prayed in a church for the death of Stalin. Terrorism, 25 years. So, Article 58 would be what you'd be arrested for: discrediting a leader, a negative attitude towards the collective farm structure, a negative attitude towards state loans, a negative attitude towards the Stalinist constitution, a negative attitude towards whatever the immediate particular measure being carried out by the party, sympathy for Trotsky, friendliness toward the United States, etc., etc., etc. So in other words, Article 58, which you got a minimum of 10 years for terrorism, basically, if you thought for yourself and disagreed with the government, 10 years. It's just like here, if you think there are only two genders, boom, lose your job. Blacks are not relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. Boom, lose your job and your reputation. There's so many of these things that the left is doing now. You misgender someone, boom, crime. In Canada, for example, you tell a politically incorrect joke, I forget the guy's name, $50,000 fine. This is what happened when the left gets power. They are the ones that censor speech. They are against free speech. Literally, if you go against the orthodoxy, look what's happened to Kanye West recently. He basically said the truth. I don't like Kanye West at all. I said in how hip-hop is the worst musical idea ever. Why I don't like the ideology and why I don't like what Kanye West does. But I agree with him here. He said, the welfare state decimated the black family, how basically all the news, media, and the entertainment industry is liberal, and how you should be able to think for yourself. And because he doesn't follow their orthodoxy, he's bullied and chastised and ridiculed. that is a baby step towards what the Soviets do. And where has it been in a communist socialist society in which free speech is valued? It wasn't in Cuba, wasn't in communist China, wasn't in Cambodia, wasn't in Soviet Union, wasn't in Nazi Germany, wasn't in fascist Italy. That's the reality. You think for yourself and you speak out against the government, boom. Because the government owns you. When you have no free speech, you have no freedom. If you don't have free speech, you don't own you anymore. Political correctness is the baby steps towards communist totalitarianism, because these people are trying to control speech. They're kind of trying to control the way you think, and if you don't think the way that they prescribe you to think, you lose your job, you lose your reputation. And here in the Soviet Union, you weren't free at all, but you lost even more freedoms. You became a slave. So that's what it is. This is why I oppose political correctness. This is why I speak vehemently against these people. This is why I do the podcast. This is why I don't apologize when I call illegitimate children bastards. Okay? This is why I don't apologize, because they don't apologize for anything. They can call you bigot, racist, homophobe, Islamophobe. They can call you things that will destroy your reputation, that will make you toxic. They can call you alt-right and all these things, white supremacists. No one bats an eye, because those opinions are the prescribed opinions by the elite. Just like in the Soviet Union, you can say, hey man, I hate private property. Any kulak should be he should be arrested, he should be enslaved, and his property should be the state's property. That is abhorrent. That is theft and slavery. And Soviet Union would say, but if you say, you know what, the United States, I like their freedoms over there. Their people are far more prosperous, and we would do better if we took more power out the hands of the government and gave it to individuals to make their own decisions and to dictate the future of their lives. Then you get thrown in the camp. So, Gulag Archipelago, check that out. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, a powerful literary work, one of the most powerful books I've ever written. Never read it in school. I don't even think I ever heard about it in school. Heard about it after I finished college. So, there's that. That's the Lord Gord Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, share the podcast, talk about the podcast, leave a comment. Let's get this thing out there. Get the Lord Gord Funk album, This Isn't TV, iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Tidal. Spread that bad boy, get your groove on. Next week, I'm going to talk about Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. I just finished it. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite passages in the book, what they mean to me, what they mean for our country and where we are now. And that one should be a fun one, because I had a lot of fun with this Gulag Archipelago podcast, and I didn't think I'd get emotional, but I did. So that's that. I'm Lord Gord. I'll talk to you next time.